Welcome back to the channel. In this week's video, we're making a stand for a bead roller. Now, this is just a simple stand. We're going to use a piece of 2" by 2" 120 wall tubing and weld it to a 1/2" plate for the bottom. But today in Fusion, we're going to show you how we make that stand, because for this thing to fit in there, it needs a slot. That tubing needs a slot, and it needs 2 bolt holes that the corresponding threaded holes on the stand will fit into. So here we go. So we're going to start with the drawing, and we know that it's 2" by 36" the stand that we want. So we're going to draw 36 inches, tab 2 inches. And because we need to cut on 2 sides of this, the slot's going to be on 2 sides of the tubing and the holes are going to be on 1 side, and we cut in 2-dimensional profiles. We're just going to flatten this tube out and make 2 different sides. That's it. So we'll grab this rectangle here, we'll come straight off of this point so we know we're exactly in line, and we'll make another one. 36, tab 2 inches. There we go. So in this video, we're going to talk about construction lines and how we use them and how you can use them to help you with your Fusion. So the first thing that we want to do is grab the line, make it a construction line, which is over here in line type. And then we're going to find the center, and we know it's center because it has that triangle right there. So that's center. Line type. There it is. We'll go all the way to the end, and we're just drawing a line right down the middle. Do this again to this one. We can tell it's a construction line because it's dotted. It's not solid. Alright, so there we go. We have our 2 construction lines. I'm going to write down the center. So we'll start with this one because it's a lot cleaner. So we need to make our slot. So our slot is going to be 0.7 inches down from the top. So we can take our line, our construction line, start there. If we come down 0.7, that's going to give us a point. Now that point is what we're going to use to make the top of the slot. So we don't want our slot to be construction, so we choose the standard line type, and we're going to make half of it. So this is going to be 3.3, and we know we want it to be 0.28 wide. So there's half of our slot. Now to get the other half, we're just going to simply mirror it. So we hit this is the mirror button. We grab the lines that we want to mirror. We don't want to mirror the center one. The mirror line is going to be that center construction line that we already made, and boom, there's our slot. We'll just get rid of this center part, and there we go. Now to make the holes, so if you can imagine those bolts, they'll come down from this side. The bead roller will sit down into the slot. We're going to cut this part off the top, and I'll explain why we left this here, just to cut it off. But the bead roller will sit down in here, and then the bolts will come down from this side and thread it into the bead roller, because it already has holes with threads in it. So it's important that we line this whole thing up so these holes will fit the bead roller. So to do that, we make our construction line again. We grab this corner here, and we come down. We want to grab it right at the center. That center line. And we want to make sure we're 90 degrees, and we are. And then we'll do the same thing on this edge. And there we go. There's the 2 top sections of our slot. Now with our construction line, once again, we can grab here, and we're going to make a point, and this is where the first hole is going to be. So the first hole is going to come up, and we know because we measured it, we want it to be 0.563 of an inch off the bottom. Now we know that our holes are 2 inches apart, so we're going to do that line type again. We're going to grab this point, and we're going to come up 2 inches, and in those 2 points, that's where our holes are going to be. So now we'll draw our holes. We'll create the circle, center diameter circle. We'll make sure that we have the standard line type. We'll grab this point, We want our holes to be 0.55. Then we'll just grab this. That's our second point, 0.55. Now there's our two holes. There's our two corresponding holes to this slot. Now all of this was pre-measured because our bead roller has, again, holes drilled into it and already threaded and tapped, or tapped and threaded. So these corresponding holes need to line up with this corresponding slot. So when we slide the bead roller down in there, these holes will line up perfectly and we could bolt it all together. So back to why I left this space here, 0.7 of an inch. And this could be any dimension really. The reason why is because we're going to cut this out on the plasma table. And the plasma table, although it can do an edge start, it doesn't like starting at an edge, coming, creating this whole tool path and cutting it off. It likes to make circles, if you will. It likes to make loops. So we just created a loop, and we know that once it's cut, we'll just simply put this on the chop saw and just cut this part off, and now we have an open-ended slot. And we know that this slot will correspond perfectly with these holes, and we'll be able to bolt the whole thing up together. So it's that simple. So now we just simply finish the sketch. We can extrude all this, 0.120. Whoops, so that's easy, that happens. We just come over here, turn on our sketch again. We extrude this one, 0.120, and there we go. Now we can turn our sketches off. There's our two sides of our tubing. We're gonna cut this side twice and this side once. Now I don't need to make another one of these to cut it, because as you'll see in the video, we set up a stop and a gauge and we zero out the machine to this corner, and then the machine comes over, it'll cut the slot out. We simply rotate this piece of tube. We rotate it twice to get to the other side. We zero out the machine again and it cuts this out. And then we'll zero out the machine in the same exact spot to cut out these two holes for the bolts. And that's it. It's that simple. So here you can see we have the stop set up and we have a line drawn on there, so we know when we turn this thing or whenever we set it up, it's going to go right back to zero where we want it to. And the machine just simply cuts that slot out. We move it off to the side, and now we rotate it twice. We'll set it back up, right back on that stop, right back on our marks, re-zero the machine, and cut out the other side, and it'll be perfect. Now we're just simply cutting off that end, so we have the open slot in our tube. So here we are cutting the base for this stand. Now this is a piece of 1/2-inch plate that we had. And what we're doing is we're doing a little bit of gouging and we're doing some cutting, all in this same process. So for the gouging, what we end up doing is we make sure we have an old set of consumables in, because the way that we do gouging isn't a preferred method by Hypertherm, but it works for us. So we set up with an old set of consumables, and then we set up the cut so it cuts faster, and we use a little bit lower of an amperage. And what that does is it just cuts the top, and it doesn't cut all the way through the 1/2-inch. Now we just did that for the letters for MKA. For the rest of it, for that piece in the center where the tubing is going to fit down into, and then of course the whole outside, we cut it at the standard 1/2-inch settings. Now here we're just simply welding this piece of tubing in onto that 1/2-inch plate, and we cut that 2-inch piece out of the center. One, it makes it really easy to center up this stand, and two, it gives it a really nice place to weld on the top and on the bottom, which makes it really strong. Here we are welding the bottom of the tube to that 1/2 inch, and what we did is we use a spacer underneath there, so when that 1/2 inch plate is sitting flat on the bench and we sit that tube down, it doesn't sit all the way down to the bench, which leaves a little bit of a gap. And now that's that gap or that space that we're using to weld a bead from that tube to that 1/2 inch plate, so it's able to sit on the ground nice and level because that bead is inside of there. Now the moment of truth to see if all of our measurements worked out. We set that thing down in the slot. You can see how it sits in the slot, and then it bolts from the front right into the machine. And because we did all of our measurements correctly, it fit in there just right. We had some 1/4 inch solid rod sitting around, so we cut it down to some lengths, and we're just welding it to the side of this tube in here, and this is where we're going to keep our dies. Something real simple. Now that the fabrication's done, at least this part of it, we take it all apart and we get ready to paint the stand. After the thing's been sanded down and wiped down with some acetone, and we're just going to simply hit it with some semi-gloss black. We got some more fabrication that we want to do to this bead roller. This is just going to get it going so we can start using it in the shop. And once we start using it, we have some more things that we want to do to it, like I said. So a simple semi-gloss black on here will be easy to strip off and grind off if we need to do some more welding. And well, there it is. Semi-gloss black paint and a custom stand. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't, please subscribe.